Now, let's just clarify something. First of all, former minister, I didn't tell you what to say. I just said that you should not take more than 30 seconds. And as usual, you disregarded what I suggested anyway. Now that's interesting. So you were in politics, eh? Because I only ever knew you as my swim coach at Camp Mazenod. I must have missed that. You were in government. Okay. Yeah. Before you suggest that you would like to have me here more often, let's just see how this goes, and maybe after it, you might not want me back again. The two orders thing that you very kindly mentioned was surreal and ridiculous. When I got the calls, I certainly said, you got the wrong guy, I want to recount, but they turned me down. I have a bit of a soft spot for London for a bunch of reasons. Number one, this may be too much information at this hour of the day, but given that my parents, 54 years ago, were students at the University of Western Ontario, as it then was, I was conceived here. So I like London for that reason. Too much information, right? Yeah, I thought so. There's so many familiar faces in this audience, starting with you, Bob Siskin, who's been a friend of my mother's for, is it 60 years? It's a long time. Anyway, you guys go way back. And I see people here who've been on the agenda, like Mike and Andy and of course Diane as well. And it's just lovely to be in a place that, I guess, Bob, the word is Hamisha. It just feels very Hamisha right now. A lovely family feeling in this room. This is a bit bizarre, but I got a kid. I'll get to the speech in a second, but I just feel this is just such an odd thing. I got a kid who's going to school in London, England right now. And I went to visit him over the Easter weekend, and I flew back yesterday morning. So I actually started my day yesterday in London, England, and ended up in London, Ontario. Like, how weird is that? Just as I was checking into the hotel, I thought to myself, boy, that's really odd. So thank you for the chance to do something that I'm sure I will never ever get to do again, 2 Londons in one day. I hope you will indulge me for a little bit here, and I'm going to keep my eye on you to make sure I don't go over time here. And hopefully I can get through my so-called prepared remarks in relatively short order, because I just love to get a few questions in too if we have time for that. I had the misfortune of, besides doing some of the stuff that Diane talked about, of also writing 4 books in 6 years during the 2000s, and holding down a full-time job, and have 4 kids as well. And that's a bit of a challenging load. And I really did swear to myself that I would never, after 4 books, write another one, because they're very difficult to do. It just takes almost all of your waking time. Those of you in the room who've done it would know it's a very hard thing. It takes over your life. And I remember before writing the first one, I asked Bob Ray, who I was interviewing about something, for some advice on it, because of course he's written a few books himself. And I said, Premier, what is the secret to getting a book written? And he simply said to me, AOC. And I said, okay, I must be missing something here. I don't get that. What's AOC? And he said, ass on chair. And that makes a certain amount of sense. There is just no substitute for putting your butt in the chair and staying there, and as my wife likes to put it, just puking it out. That's what she says. You just stay there and you puke. And I do that. I used to get off the air when I did Studio 2. It was a live show at 8 o'clock at night, so I'd get off the air at 9, and then write till 1 or 2 or 3 every day, and you do that 5 days a week, and then on Saturday and Sunday, probably 12 hours Saturday, 12 hours Sunday, and it's just not a good life. It really isn't. It's not a balanced life, which is why I promised I would never do it again, because when your ass is on chair, there's really not much else you do in life. You don't go to baseball games, you don't go to hockey games, you don't have lunch with your friends, you don't accept invitations from very nice people to come speak, you just have AOC. I do remember at one point my wife saying to me, there's this whole chunk of time in the day that you're really not utilizing properly, where you could be writing, sort of between midnight and 6 a.m. If you just did it then, it doesn't quite work that way. So no more books, I swore, no more books. And then one day, a couple of years ago, I had a conversation with a guy that some of you in this room might remember. His name's Patrick Boyer. I used to be a member of Parliament from Etobicoke Lakeshore in Toronto. And he said to me, just apropos of nothing, "Steve, you have interviewed every premier since Bill Davis, right?" And I said, "Yeah, that's right, actually." And he said, "And you wrote a book about John Robarts, whom everybody in this room, of course, would know." And I said, "Yeah, true." And he said, "Well, Steve, Robarts won his first election in '63. That's 50 years ago." We were talking a few years ago. He said, "You've got kind of a direct connection to the last half century of Ontario premiers." And I thought for a second. I said, "Well, I guess that's right." And then he said the words which I guess I will never forgive him for, which were, "Steve, there's got to be a book in there somewhere." And apparently he was right. I tried to forget about that conversation. But then, as I thought about it some more, I thought, there aren't too many people who are as old as I am, who have been watching Queen's Park as long as I have been. There are a lot of things that happen behind the scenes in my dealings with the premiers, which might be of some interest to my parents, and maybe a few members of the public too. Who knows? Maybe there is a book in there somewhere. So I had a meeting with some of the higher-ups at TVO, and I said, humor me for a second. If I can get access to the interviews in the archives, in the basement, and use some of that material, and then add some of my own sort of first-person recollections and accounts and analysis from today, we might have the makings of a decent book there that we could sort of give away to people for, who are donors to TVO for premiums or whatever. And the response I got was, "That's a nice idea, but you can't use any of the interviews you did for TVO because that's our intellectual property," meaning them, not me, "and you," meaning me, "can't profit from our," meaning their, intellectual property. You follow me here? You following this? He said, you can't really allow that. And I thought, okay, well, I guess that's a fair point. I did the interviews, but somebody else shot them, somebody else directed them, anyway, there's a long list of people who obviously go into the doing of an interview, and I certainly wasn't going to go out and interview all of them all over again. I mean, a couple of them are no longer with us, and the rest of them are probably sick of me and don't want to talk to me about their lives all over again. So I figured that was it. And then I had a little bit of a eureka moment. I went back to the brass at TVO and I said, okay, if the problem with this idea is that I'm not allowed to personally profit from your intellectual property, how about I just write the book anyway for nothing? And as the words came out of my mouth, I thought to myself, you are the biggest schmuck in the world for offering to do this. What kind of idiot writes a book for nothing? Who subjects themselves to that kind of... But then I thought about it some more, and I realized that given what publishers pay to write a book anyway, you're only working for about 50 cents an hour at the end of the day, as those of you who've written massive bestsellers in Canada would know. Unless you're Margaret Atwood or Mordecai Richler, you're not probably making much of a living at it anyway. And you know what? I actually had the temerity to think this book might be able to make a modest contribution to how people understand our premiers. And so I thought, what the hell? And it's done. Paikin and the Premiers. Not my idea for the title, I should add. That was Patrick Boyer's idea. Because I remember when Bob Ray saw the title, he thought, don't you think it should be the Premiers and Paikin? But it just, he's right, of course. They should get first billing. That doesn't quite sound as nice, I think. Paikin and the Premiers sounds more like a rock band or something. It just sounds right, So it has arrived in better bookstores everywhere, including here this morning at the Canadian Club. It will sell for the deliciously cheap price of $25, no tax. Some of the proceeds will go to Dundurn Publishing, some of the proceeds will go to TVO, and all of the complaints will go to me, and that's fine. Actually, got to tell you, one of the things I really did enjoy about doing the book was that I did, in some respects, get to relive a lot of the events that I had covered over the course of, and I can't believe it as the words come out of my mouth, the more than 30 years that I've already been in journalism. The book, I hope, presents itself in a couple of different ways. It is, in some respects, because it consists of a lot of the interviews I did with the premiers over the years. So in that respect, it's a kind of a first draft of history. And number two, when I mix in the sort of 2013 perspective that I have on the events of the past and some of the behind-the-scenes stuff that, of course, you wouldn't have heard about on TV, I think that mix sort of works. And the feedback I've been getting so far is pretty encouraging. I've had people in various government departments say, you know, it's funny, I worked for that guy, and I never knew about X, Y, and Z that was happening, you know, behind the scenes, or you know, I worked for Dalton McGuinty, but I didn't know a thing about John Robarts, and it was good to sort of fill in some of those blanks. I think that also, despite what you might hear about covering provincial premiers and provincial politics, and these 8 premiers that I personally have known, and the 1 extra, Robarts, who I didn't know because I was only a year old when he became premier, they're important people. You know, we joke a lot about politics, and we say a lot of discouraging things about people who go into politics, but you know, these folks are important people. They have a lot of influence, a lot of power over our lives. And you know, if they're lucky, they're the right person with their hand on the tiller at the time to really make a difference in our lives and make the times we live in quite historic. I have no doubt but that 50 years from now, somebody is going to be writing about this time that we're in right now, because I think it is absolutely unprecedented and historic. We have, I don't have to tell people in this room, 2 female major party leaders for the first time ever. And of course, we have our first female premier ever. We have the leader of the third party, the NDP, who is the most popular leader of them all. We have a minority parliament for the first time in a quarter century. And we have essentially a 3-way tie right now. I mean, there's a new poll out today, and it's just, you know, it's very, very close. I was talking to what Diane, we might call a senior cabinet minister the other day, as people who used to talk to you would say. I was talking to a senior cabinet minister the other day, and I was asking him how he handicapped the current race, and he said, you know what, I honestly believe, this is a Liberal cabinet minister, he said, I honestly believe we got a shot at winning a majority government next time. And then he said, of course, we could also come second. And then he said, or we could come third. And that's how fluid it is. I mean, the Liberals coming third, I'm not making any predictions, but it's possible. It's only happened 3 times in almost 150 years. It's rare, but it is possible. So in conclusion, how am I doing here? Oh, I'm doing fine, Sunil. I'm going to have lots of time for questions here, right? What time do I have to be done by? 10 o'clock. Very sweet, very sweet. Let's take a few questions after we get done. You know, you remember that line from Godfather 3, Michael Corleone? He said, every time I think I'm out, they suck me right back in. Well, I felt that way when I was writing this book, but I'm glad I did, because the government of Ontario, folks, it's the second most important government in the country. And the people who have had this job, there's only 25 of them in 150 years who've had the job of Premier of Ontario. There have been, since 1867, tens of millions of us who have lived in this province, and 25 have got to the top of that mountain. And of that 25, you know, half of them inherited it. Only half of them won elections. So they're a pretty select group. And I think, in their own way, kind of fascinating. And I hope this book that I've written kind of adds to the understanding and the knowledge of what being Premier of Ontario is like. And I hope someday some kid pulls it off a library shelf or something like that and says, huh, I wonder what this is about. I want to learn more about who these premiers were. And hopefully they'll read it and enjoy it and find out more, because that's why I did it. Anyway, a delight to be with you this morning and happy to take your questions. Thank you very, very much.